Hi, I'm Adam Porter and this is my board gaming vlog, and this is actually a follow-on video from, I suppose, my last two videos, which were about pitching and developing relationships with publishers. And as a response to those videos, a viewer called Juan asked me a question about whether it was appropriate to pitch games to multiple publishers at the same time, and then as a follow-on from that, what would you do if a publisher showed interest but you also had other publishers showing interest at the same time? So I thought I'd broaden that out into a conversation about how do I go about choosing a publisher for my games. And that's a strange concept, isn't it? Choosing a publisher, because I suppose most designers are going into this thinking that they're going to be lucky if they find a publisher. And I mean, that's absolutely true. You know, often I'll be pitching games around and I end up with one publisher that wants it and a lot of other people have rejected the game. But that said, if you have a really good game, then multiple publishers are going to recognise that. And I think you've got to be honest with yourself and look at your game and ask those sort of questions before you start pitching around. You know, how unique is this game really? I mean, obviously, when you're speaking to publishers, you're going to make your game sound as brilliant as you possibly can. And you know, but you've got to ask yourself those honest questions. Is this a game that publishers are going to be falling over themselves to publish, or is it going to be a bit of a niche sort of product that I'm going to have to find a natural sort of fit for, but it might not be for everybody? And then you've got to go into that sort of process with that in mind, and you've got to think about where are you going to be meeting these publishers. Are you going to be going to a convention? If so, then that really reduces the pool of publishers that you could approach. Because not every publisher is going to be there. Even if you're going to Essenspiel in Germany or Gen Con in America, not every publisher is there. In Essenspiel in particular, I very rarely meet with many American publishers. They're just not all present at that convention, and you get the feel that that's probably because their big show is Gen Con in America, which I don't get to go to because it's so expensive to get over there. If you're going to be dealing with publishers by email and making your submissions that way, then of course it's a little bit, you've got a much bigger pool of publishers to approach, although I think it's probably harder to get noticed there because you don't get that face-to-face contact. So the first thing you're going to consider when you look at that pool of publishers is which type of games those publishers make. I mean, I would start by looking at my favourite games and thinking, right, would those publishers possibly look at one of my games? You know, game design does not bring in an awful lot of profit. It can do. I mean, I hear stories about it. It doesn't happen to me. I don't bring in lots and lots of money. My games do okay. They do pretty well, but they don't bring in a fortune. So I'm not doing it, you know, largely for financial gain. I'm doing it for satisfaction and enjoyment. And that means that I want to see my game with a publisher that I love, where I can feel really proud of that. Okay, so that's going to be my starting point, is looking at games which I have really enjoyed, where I would feel really, really excited to see my game in that sort of lineup. So for example, my game Big Bazaar is with Blue Orange, and for years I've loved Blue Orange games, and it was just incredible to have a box with Blue Orange on it, to see it on the convention shelves with all the other Blue Orange games. That's an amazing feeling, to have your game with a company that you love. Okay, so that's your starting point for looking at publishers. Next thing is, are they going to accept submissions? And so you want to get onto their website and have a look and see if they've got any guidance on that. Most publishers do, actually. If you look at their website, they'll have a little section on there for designers and telling you how to submit games, or telling you if it would be inappropriate for you to do so. So have a look at their websites, do your research. Get onto Board Game Geek, look at the games that they've made in the past. Does your game fit into the style of the company? You know, if my favourite company is Blue Orange, well, that's fantastic, but not if I've designed a war game. Okay, if I've designed a war game, it'd be pointless me showing it to them. You've got to fit your style of game to the appropriate company. And I've talked about that a little bit before in my pitching video about, you know, how to make sure that your game matches with the right sort of company. So that's the first thing that you want to think about. What are the games the publishers made in the past? Who are your favourite publishers? Would you be happy for your game to sit with this company? And so on. The next thing I look for from a publisher is enthusiasm. And what I mean by that is, do they love their games? Do they love their games? Or do they just produce their games and then loosely support some of them and then drop others of them? Or is every single game for them something which they push and they promote and and they love? I would follow companies on Facebook and Twitter and see what sort of promotion they do for their games. I'd look at their presence at conventions. How much do they support their games in terms of demo tables, in terms of the sales pitch, in terms of the longevity of those games? Do those games appear year after year, or do you see them once and then 3 months later they've disappeared? Look at the games with that company that haven't made it. So go back through their catalogue, look at the Board Game Geek website, look at the games which haven't become massive successes. Are there numerous games being released every year that you've never heard of? That suggests that that company is producing a lot of games, and maybe some of them are mega hits, but the ones that haven't been heard of and have fallen away, did they get any support? Maybe not. That's the approach a lot of publishers have taken over the years, is to produce a lot of games and then spot the ones which are sort of starting to garner interest and focus all their attention on that. Meanwhile, the other games fall away. It's a business model that's been criticised quite a lot over the last couple of years as publishers have started to realise that with the thousands of games that are coming out, they might want to focus in on a few key titles and make sure they're really good and that they can really support them. So I want to see enthusiasm. I want to see that a publisher is going to love my game, is going to support it, is going to push it through, and work with me on that. And some of that you only get from face-to-face contact, but other bits you can see from their online interactions. Some publishers, you get to know their names just by watching the sort of comments that they make online, in the forums about their games. Are they present? Are they involved in discussions about rules and answering queries from the consumers? The third thing that I would want to think about with a publisher is scale. So how big is this publisher? And contrary to what you're probably expecting me to say, it's not just about I want to go with the biggest publisher. As I said, sometimes the very big publishers are going to produce a lot of games, and they might produce your game, but that does not mean your game is going to get the same love and attention as their sort of flagship games. Sometimes you're better off going with a smaller publisher who loves your game and is going to support it all the way through. Now that may be a publisher who doesn't sell in the same quantities. It may be a publisher that hasn't been around for as long, but your game stands a really good chance of success if it's with a publisher like that, who can support it, who can love it, who has the same enthusiasm for the game that you have. And the brilliant thing about the board game market now is that a small game with a small publisher can become a massive success, because the Spiel des Jahres jury, they look at all these publishers. They don't care whether a game is selling, potentially being produced in hundreds of thousands of units, or whether a game is being produced in, a few thousand units. All they're looking for is the quality of the production and the quality of the gameplay. So you see games coming through and becoming enormous hits. I mean, this year on the Spiel des Jahres awards, a nominee is Cartographers by Thunderworks, which Cartographers is a phenomenal game. I loved it when I got it at the end of last year, and I've played it a lot. But it is not from a major publisher. And what you can find is that if a game is really good, a lot of these companies, even the smaller companies, will have partners in other countries who may be bigger publishers, and so your game can grow and can sort of develop a following outside of that initial publisher. So I don't think it's a case of avoiding the small publishers and going for the big ones. In fact, quite the opposite. I think it's about going for the publisher that really seems to be in love with your game. I do think about the duration that company's been in business, though. I would very rarely consider a publisher that hadn't kind of been present. I want to see that they've been at the conventions. I've seen them around for a couple of years, 2 or 3 years. I've seen them around. They're doing all right. Their games do okay. I've heard of their games. At that point, I might start to consider pitching to them and discussing whether they might produce one of my games. But if they're brand new on the scene, then I kind of want to see them prove themselves a little bit before I will, take a chance on them, even if they are extremely enthusiastic and pleasant, and and make a great sort of pitch to me about why I might consider them as a publisher. The final thing that I would consider in thinking about a publisher is which country they're from. Not because there are any countries that I wouldn't want to publish my games, but because I need to think about whether that game is going to be sort of present in the marketplace where I live. A lot of my pleasure in producing games is in, when my friends say to me, where can I get hold of a copy? And I say, oh, you can actually buy it at this shop down the road. Or you can get it from the amazon.co.uk, but if a game is produced in a different country, sometimes it's not even going to hit amazon.co.uk, let alone hit your friendly local game store. And it's not going to be launched at a convention that any of your friends can get to. So if you have a game published in the Asian market, for example, that might be a wonderful publisher and they might make a magical product, but are you going to actually sort of see it out there, or is that going to be just a case of, it's produced, you get your copies, and then it's sitting waiting for royalties? That's not as much fun for me as being involved. And this is a problem for me and a dilemma for me, because some of the publishers that I really, really love don't reach my friendly local game store, don't reach amazon.co.uk in every case. So for example, ZOC Verlag, that is one of my favourite publishers. I love the German company ZOC Verlag. I love the German company Amigo Spieler. I love the Chinese company Jolly Thinkers. And I would happily have them publish my games, but that's because I'm a game fanatic, and actually just having their logo on my box would kind of be enough for me. But otherwise, I do get a lot of pleasure out of sending my friends and friends of friends, and my parents saying to me, oh, my friend wants to get hold of a copy of your game. So my parents' friends, they can get hold of it from Amazon, or buy it from a local game shop. I love that. And I think you need to think about that when you're thinking about where you're pitching your game. Will you actually see it in your gaming world? Will your friends in your local game group be playing it? Or will it just be sort of done and gone, and no one's any the wiser? So those are my key things that I'm thinking about when I'm looking at publishers. I suppose I do also think about contractual sort of issues, but that comes at a later stage after you've pitched. I might want to know from a publisher the sort of estimation that they have of first print run, how many international partners they have, how wide their sort of spread is in the industry, what their most successful games were, how many copies they sold. And of course, you've got to be very tactful and careful about how you ask those questions and when you ask those questions. And sometimes I won't ask those questions at all. But it's getting a feel for those sort of things. And other contractual issues too, what sort of things do they want in the contract, and that comes further down the line when you're deciding whether to work with that publisher or not. Coming back to Juan's question about pitching to multiple publishers, my feeling is that most publishers expect that. Certainly at conventions, it's almost the standard that designers will be going around showing their product to multiple different publishers. That said, I think you should be telling people that that's what you're doing as you go along, and certainly when you're emailing people, you should be letting them know that there are other companies interested or that you've approached other companies. You will find sometimes that a publisher will ask you for exclusivity. Sometimes that's at a very early stage. You'll show them the design, and at that first pitch meeting they'll say, well, if we're going to evaluate this game, we need first refusal on it. And I think that's up to you whether you accept that or not, and you've got to think about how important that publisher is to you, but I would put a time limit on it. You don't want to give indefinite first refusal to a company. It's got to be a case of, well, I won't sign it to anyone else for this duration, And then after that, I'm afraid I'm going to be talking to other people because I can't hold it for you forever. So I'd be open with publishers about who you've shown it to, how much interest you've had, but I don't see an issue with pitching to multiple publishers unless a publisher has expressly told you that they do not want you to do that. I have sometimes designed a game with specific publishers in mind. In fact, I've got 2 upcoming games which I only ever showed to one publisher, that specific publisher. And they're publishers I've worked with before. So I know the sort of stuff they want. I went away, I thought, right, I'm going to design a game for that company, and I came up with a game specifically which then went on to be signed. And that's wonderful when that happens, but it's not the norm, I suppose. Generally, I consider pitching to publishers a multi-stage, almost multi-year approach. I learned very early on, I think the first year that I was pitching my games, one of my games, I was offered a contract very soon after the convention. This was after Essenspiel. And the contract was offered to me by a company that produced lovely looking games, none of which I'd ever played. I had no idea about the quality of them. I hadn't really heard of their games. I didn't know whether they were a big company, a small company. They'd been around for a few years, so I knew they were established, but I didn't know what sort of level of sales I could expect. And I didn't know that their games, the reputation was fairly sort of middling, so I wasn't really sure about this company. Meanwhile, I had another company that I loved. I just thought it was an amazing company. I knew their games and they were so enthusiastic about my game, but they didn't offer me a contract. They wanted to evaluate. So I was stuck with that dilemma of, do I sign a contract with this company that I didn't really know, or do I hold on for this company that I love, who was enthusiastic, but I had no way of knowing whether they were seriously going to sign the game. So I turned down the contract with the company that I didn't really know, and I waited for the company that was enthusiastic, and inevitably that company didn't want to sign my game. So a few months later, I went back to the company that had initially offered me the contract, and they said, I'm sorry, we've already got our catalogue lined up for the next year, and they weren't interested anymore. So I lost that contract, and that game never came to market. I've shown it to other publishers. It's come very close at times, but it's never quite come to market. So I learnt a lot from that. And from then on, I've always taken this same approach, which is to not show my games to everybody. I don't just show it to anybody who will look. I choose a number of publishers that I would be very happy to produce my game. If I would be slightly disappointed, I won't show it to them. I will show it to the people where I would be delighted for them to publish my game. And I make a list, and it might be 5 publishers, it might be 10 publishers, but I'll probably cap it around there, okay? Fully aware that they might not go for it, in which case I might be left waiting for another 6 months until the next convention, or maybe even another year before I can show it to anybody again. But I'm fine with that because I work on multiple games at any one time. So if I have a game on the shelf for a year, fine, I'm working on other stuff in the meantime. But what that means is the following year, I can look back and I can write, okay, those 10 companies that I showed it to, they weren't interested. Who else would I be delighted to publish my game? And I can come up with another 10. And then I'll go and approach them. And it might be the third year that I come up with another 10. And by this point, I've shown it to 30 people. And finally, I might find a match. Now, at each stage, I'm taking on board the feedback of the publishers. That first 10, they give me their feedback. They tell me why they weren't interested, and I can develop the game ready to show it to the next 10. Okay, and so that sort of staged approach means hopefully you don't get into the situation where multiple people want your game, or if you do get into the situation where multiple people want your game, you're going to be much more comfortable with a sort of first come, first served approach. And I don't think that's a bad approach to take, because if somebody is coming back to you quickly, it's usually an indication of enthusiasm. And if they're that enthusiastic about your game that they want to move quickly on it, and it probably means they're going to get it to market quickly, and that is all beneficial to you. I don't have an issue with pitching to multiple publishers. I think it's perfectly reasonable. Just be open about what you're doing and try and avoid getting yourself into those sort of dilemmas that I got into early in my career. Anyway, I hope this video was useful to you. If it was, please watch some of my others. I have loads of videos on my channel, Adam's Board Game Wales, about game design, but also just looking at various different games that are out there and the mechanisms they use and what are my favourites of the year and so on. If you want to follow me on Twitter, it's at Board Game Wales. On Board Game Geek, I'm Adam78. Thank you very much for watching and all the best.